What the scariest true story you know? My maternal grandfather, in the days before hot water on tap, put a big pot on to boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe with. The pot boiled over and extinguished the flame, and he returned to find them dead of carbon monoxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. The murder of the Grony family. A deranged pedo named Joseph Edward Duncan was already on the run from the cops for a past sexual assault. He was incredibly charming and manipulative, and was truly pure evil. He camped outside a family's rural home, unseen by them. He picked it out after driving past it and seeing children's toys outside. He watched them from afar, got to know their routine with the intent of kidnapping the children. 10-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Shasta. Jed found the lock on the door was broken, entered the home in the middle of the night and tied up the mom, dad and teenage son. He put Shasta and Dylan in his car and killed the rest of the family with a hammer. He traveled around various campsites and cabins with Shasta and Dylan captive, sexually abusing, torturing and raping them. He eventually shot Dylan, but Shasta talked him out of killing her. Jed ended up telling her she taught him how to love. The scariest part is a CCTV footage of Jed and Shasta at a gas station, because you could easily believe they were just a normal dad and a grumpy daughter if you were an onlooker. https u2.be/zttd-micda. Eventually, he took her to a diner where he was finally apprehended when a waitress noticed something was up, and Shasta was saved after 7 weeks in his clutches. As he was dragged away, he called to her, "Promise me you'll visit me in prison." Jed was put on death row and found to be guilty of 3 previous child murders. He died a few months ago from cancer. But the worst part of it all is how horrible Shasta's life has been afterwards. Drug addiction, in and out of jail, losing her children, etc. Just the most horrifying story ever. The Franklin Expedition. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 British sailors and military personnel on 2 ships embarked on a mission to find the Northwest Passage from the Atlantic across to the Pacific through Arctic waters. The ships, named HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 2 former warships reclassified as icebreakers thanks to their sturdier builds, departed British waters in the 1845 and were never seen again. In subsequent rescue attempts and investigations, it was discovered that quite possibly everything that could have gone wrong on the expedition did so. The weight of the ships, with their reinforced hulls and decks designed to fire mortars and cannons off of, worked against them, as much of the waters crossed were shallow and filled with rocks and icebergs. The time chosen to launch the expedition occurred at one of the coldest Arctic periods in recent history, meaning the polar ice, and particularly the pack ice, didn't melt like usual as the ships became locked in the frozen water and essentially experienced an endless winter for over 4 years. The food they stored, which was supposed to last for years thanks to the revolutionary new process of canning, was bought at the lowest bidder. Much of the food was improperly sealed and spoiled, leading to food poisoning, and even the ones that were properly sealed and kept intact were riddled with lead thanks to the soldering used to keep the food inside fresh. In conjunction with the lead pipes in the ships the men would have been drinking out of for years, meant the entire crews of both ships was slowly being infected with all manner of diseases, namely botulism, scurvy and heavy lead poisoning, which also affects the mind, leading to memory loss, heavy paranoia and general mental deterioration, combined with already present tuberculosis that killed a small number of the crew before departing to the Arctic. After about 2 to 3 years stuck in the ice, the captain in charge of the voyage, John Franklin, and many other crew members died in unknown Circumstances and the remainder decided to abandon ships and try and hike out together to the nearest trading outpost and Backfish River in Canada, hundreds of miles away, by loading up their rowboats with supplies and fixing them on sleds to be pulled. All remaining crew perished on that journey. Their remains discovered by local Inuits, Netsilik tribes, who described desolate campsites of skeleton-like corpses with hazily built, half-open tents and even human body parts in cookpots, heavily implying that the men resorted to cannibalism in their last desperate hours. The Nutty Putty Cave Incident. https://imager.com/bkmph9v.jpg. A spelunker got stuck upside down in a narrow cave for 26 hours. Crews tried to pull him out with pulleys, but had to be careful not to break his legs, because that could be fatal with the circumstances he was in. Rescuers even almost dislodged him, only for an anchor to fail at the last second, plunging him back into the crevice. He eventually died, and they sealed the cave shut with him inside. In the 80s there was a Mexican cult led by an American named Adolfo Constanzo. They used to kidnap random people from tourist towns and nearby cities and perform human sacrifice on them in their rural Mexican desert compound, usually torturing in elaborate rituals for hours or days before finally letting them die. These rituals included vivisections, castrations, eyeball removal, tongue removal, teeth pulling, skin flaying, hanging, etc. They used amphetamines and cocaine to force the victim to stay awake during the torture and not pass out from shock. The cult believed the more pain and fear they could generate in the sacrifice victim, the more powerful the body parts would be as ritual trinkets and also for food for the cult's nganga, which is a large ritual cauldron used to store bones, blood, meat, and other valuable items that the cult believed gave them power. They used to make staves out of wired-together spinal columns, and they would often eat the victims' eyeballs during the rituals. They are believed to have kidnapped and sacrificed over 26 people to their nganga in their 3 years that they were active from 1986 to 1989. The leader committed suicide when the police showed up at their compound. They arrested 14 cult members, but most people believe there were at least a dozen more that escaped and are still out there. In 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his pregnant wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans' trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. Had the police handled the forensic evidence properly, Christie would have been caught when they were investigating Evans, and those 4 people would still be alive. The government didn't acknowledge that Evans was innocent until 2004. The Broken Arrow killings. 2 brothers brutally murdered their entire family. At one point their young 5 or 6-ish siblings were hiding in the bathroom when one of the brothers pretended to need their help. Soon as they let him in, he killed them. One of their last words were, "Please don't kill me, I love you." Horrifying story. Happened to my boss's best friend when they were around 17. Best friend's parents were out of town one weekend and she had the house to herself. Went about her business having dinner, watching TV, then decided to go to bed. She was lying in her bed with her back to her closet when she heard the door open. She somehow pretended to be asleep. The man who was hiding in the closet walked around her bed to the side she was laying, facing, gently stroked her hair and face, then left. She immediately called her boyfriend to ask him to come over, then called her parents and then the police. Long story short, this man had been getting into their home via a doggy door. They didn't have a dog and didn't bother to secure it. and he'd been living in a tent in the forestry area behind their home for months to creep on her. They found a ton of surveillance footage of her sleeping and pieces of her clothes and stuff. If I recall correctly, this happened somewhere in Alabama. Most likely mid-2000s. A woman 2 blocks away from my house had multiple children and was pregnant again. I heard my mom talking about her. She has more kids than me and she about to have another? She's crazy. Mom had 6 of us. One day the lady wasn't pregnant anymore. And there was no baby to be found. Someone told the police about it. The police questioned them and raided their home. They found the newborn dead and stuffed in the freezer. Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his daughter in a secret room in his basement for 24 years. And fathered 6 to 7 children on her. H.G. The lone survivor of what would later be called the Wichita Massacre. She was a 25-year-old elementary school teacher at the time. And had gone to the triplex where her boyfriend, Jason Befford, a science teacher, lived with 2 roommates, Brad Hayka, a chemist, and Aaron Sander, who was studying to become a priest. H.G. settled in front of the TV and began grading papers when Heather Muller, a friend of Aaron Sanders, showed up. The 5 friends watched TV and eventually retired to their various bedrooms. H.G. was woken from her sleep shortly after by loud voices and the bedroom door being kicked open. The 2 perps eventually gathered all of the persons in the residence and herded them to the bedroom and ordered them, at gunpoint, to strip. Many atrocities occurred as hours went by. But in the end H.G., after being shot in the head in a frozen soccer field, ran naked for almost a mile to find a house with Christmas lights. It was mid-December. To beg for assistance. https n wikipedia.org/wiki/Wichita_massacre. Allison Botha. On December 18, 1994. Port Elizabeth resident Allison Botha was abducted, raped, stabbed and left for dead by Franz du Toit and Theuns Kruger. They slashed her throat 17 times. So deep she had to hold her own head on as she crawled to the road for help. With her other hand she had to hold in the organs spilling from her stomach, where she had been stabbed more than 30 times. By some miracle the knife thrusts had missed her main arteries, so she did not bleed to death and was able to breathe through her severed trachea. There is a documentary that is on Amazon Prime called Allison. Worth the watch but might be traumatic for some viewers. Trailer for Allison. https://u2.b/dz3cwa oxen c. Movie camera. A guy in a sinking ship found an oxygen bubble and only drank a sip of Diet Coke every 7 hours. He was rescued after 60 hours after being under constant danger from drowning and even sharks. The USS West Virginia was a ship damaged during the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the ship was attacked, the people on board heard banging noises coming from inside the ship. Turns out that these noises were people. They were trapped in a room to where they couldn't be broken out of it because of the water that would seep in and drown them, and they couldn't be brought out from the top because of the gases that lingered there that were extremely flammable. When the vessel was salvaged 6 months later, the bodies of these 3 men were found. The other things that remained were empty cans of food and water and a calendar marked from December 7 to December 23. This means they were trapped in there for 16 days. They probably kept wondering if they were ever going to make it out and then had to come to the realization that they might not be saved. And they had the fear of drowning in the tight little compartment of the ship. They had to face the realization that you are going to die and the psychological torture that goes along with it. The Reyna Marroquin. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki, murder_Reyna_Maroc%C3% Story. **A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s. Got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss's wife. She was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I grew up on a farm in the Texas Panhandle. The boxy part on top. In a house a few miles from ours. Most of the members of the family were randomly murdered. One girl, 10 years old at the time, survived by pretending to be dead. https www.texasmonthly.com/articles/the-girl-who-saw-2- I worked in forensic medicine. My boss had to perform an autopsy on a chopped-off head that was found by two completely traumatized children. The autopsy itself took 7 hours because the person had over 56 different injuries to the head. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, me and my twin brother would help our friend do his paper route. One summer we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack and his cats were eating him. The story of the Lake Nyos disaster. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki, lake_Nyos_disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There is no antidote. The cure is CPR or life support for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave the body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky. Eyes frozen open, unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others. He lied there as the sun slowly burnt out his retinas. He became permanently blind. One day, this kid gets taken to school by his stepmom for a big science fair. Things go well. He has his picture taken. Stepmom watches him go down the hallway to class. And he's never seen again. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/disappearance_of_Chiron_Hormone. In my country there is a story of the madman on Route 226, who murdered prostitutes and was never found. It is estimated that he killed 12 women. It was the 2000s. Some rumored that he was not a single man, but a man close to the police, and that is why he was never caught. This was posted here the last time. The story is about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. Here is the article. https www.nbcwashington.com/news/local trial begins. Mon for mom found pushing dead son in swing, 67,610. Absolutely horrifying. Sujigiri, or shi-zan, literally, crossroads killing, is a Japanese term for a practice when a samurai, after receiving a new katana or developing a new fighting style or weapon, tests its effectiveness by attacking a human opponent, usually a random defenseless passer-by. In many cases during nighttime. I can't imagine how terrifying it must have been, being an innocent traveler walking a trail at night, when suddenly an elite swordsman just materializes from the shadows and begins butchering you and your family, just for fun. And he's going to get away with it too, because this was during the lawless Sengoku period when samurai were a protected elite class. It's just disturbing to me. Edit. Apparently there is a Japanese historian that argues that the intentions of these killings may not always be for merely testing blades and that a more common reason might be robbery. But regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, what is known for certain is that innocent passer-bys are being slain from the shadows by an untouchable elite class during the Sengoku. Honestly, I don't care their motive. The end result is civilians being dismembered and disemboweled randomly and in the dark of night, for lols and or money. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not exactly a ghost story, but as a parent that scares the shit out of me. Just heard today from my mom for the first time. My grandma grew up on a farm. She was over at a friend's for the night, and as they were getting in bed, the other girl said, "Oh, we forgot to check the pasture gate." They got out there and my gran says, "We locked this." Her friend's almost casual response, "I know. There's a man under the bed." It wasn't uncommon for drifters to show up places like that, and this was what they were taught to do. The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom cabinet mirror. The story of Jamie Kloss is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 13 to 14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough. But here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning, no grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. Nearby case 2012 Delhi. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki 2012_Delhi_gang_rape_and_murder. A female student boarded an off-duty bus with a male friend. They were returning home after watching a film. The 6 men, who were already on board, including the driver, attacked the couple. taking turns to rape the woman in the moving bus around the city, before brutally assaulting her with an iron rod. Her friend was beaten and tied to watch the assault. They were then thrown out onto the roadside to die. Some passers-by found them naked and bloodied and called the police. 2 weeks later, after widespread protests that demanded India reckon with its treatment of women, the victim died in a hospital in Singapore, where she was taken for further treatment after her condition deteriorated in a Delhi hospital. All 6 people were arrested for the attack. One of them was found dead in jail in March 2013, having apparently taken his own life. Another, who was 17 at the time of the attack, was released in 2015, after serving 3 years in a reform facility. The remaining 4 were hanged in the capital's high-security Tihar prison. I read a story recently about Paulette Gebara Farah, a 4-year-old child who went missing from her room in 2010. Her parents immediately notified authorities and started a social media campaign to find Paulette. Paulette's room was searched multiple times and used by her parents to do media interviews. Here's the terrifying part. Paulette was found dead 10 days later. In her bed. She had wedged herself between the mattress and the footboard and suffocated. Here. https://imager.com, A7GSKN4X. Is her bed before they found her. It's insane looking at that picture and knowing she is there and no one had found her. Here is an article for anyone interested. https://news/nation-world/estet-mexico-stunned-missing-child-dead-at-home-2010 April 04-story.html edit fixed link. Story of Aruna Shanbao. She spent 42 years of her life in a vegetative state after she was raped by a sweeper of the hospital where she worked as a nurse. What's more scary is the fact that the culprit never got punished and still roams freely. This one kid back in the early 20th century named Bobby Dunbar. He went missing. And after like a year of searching for him, his parents came across a man with a kid who looked a lot like Bobby. They believed it was their kid. And after a legal battle with the kid's supposed mother, they brought the kid home. A wild-ass parade happened due to the missing kid's return. He lived and died believing he was, in fact, Bobby Dunbar. Well, a few decades later, his granddaughter asked Bobby's nephew, I think, for a DNA sample so she could see if her and Bobby's nephew were related. Turns out, they weren't, meaning the real Bobby Dunbar is still missing and probably died alone without his parents. The story about the entire town in Iran that was buried under such an intense snowstorm. It smothered 4,000 people. https://wiki/1972_Iran_blizzard also. That molasses flood that drowned a bunch of people. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/great_molasses_flood. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess. It was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes. I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid and I removed the larva. Years ago I was reading the local paper that had a "This Day in History" section. I don't remember if it occurred after the First World War or the Second. Though I'm thinking it was the first. A former serviceman and his wife were having their 6th child. While she was in the hospital giving birth, he took the first 5 children to the local quarry, where he killed them and then committed suicide. Edit. Found some info. I found this just now. And it ended up being World War II and not World War I like I thought. Thoak, I didn't remember reading the husband's age at the time. It was older than what I presumed and they all died at the same time since he drove the car into the pit. June 14, 45 Pioneer. Murder, suicide. Mary Jane. Earl. Alice May. Betty Lou. Alva Stoner by their father. Alfred Stoner. Age 38. Just gotten back from World War II. Drove himself and kids into gravel pit S of Pioneer while wife was in hospital giving birth to baby. 6. Over 1,000 people showed up to watch the search for the bodies. I also searched on Find a Grave and the mom died in 2010. An only living child. The newborn. Passed away in 1993. Long before her own mother. If Find a Grave is correct, the mom never remarried. Junko Furuta's murderers should be in prison for the rest of their lives. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/murder_of_Junko_Furuta. How any of them are walking scot-free is incomprehensible to me. The story of Hugh Glass. The man was left for dead after being mauled by a grizzly bear. 2 men were supposed to stay behind with him but they were scared of Indians showing up. According to Wikipedia, Glass, who, in the best historical accounts, crawled and stumbled 200 miles, 320 kilometers, to Fort Kiowa, South Dakota, after being abandoned without supplies or weapons by fellow explorers. The man traveled 200 miles on foot while badly injured with the motivation of killing the 2 men who left him behind. He forgave one of them and he couldn't touch the other guy cause he joined the army. You get the death penalty for killing a soldier. The movie The Revenant was loosely based on it. Great movie by the way. Someone close to me suffers from schizophrenia and the voices convinced them that they would chop up their so and child. They didn't have one. And should end their life. They tried to do that and thankfully their so got home early to see smoke bellowing from the kitchen. Both of them were safe. That's how the so found out that they had schizophrenia. We got them all the help they could and they are doing a lot better now. I know not scary, but it was sure as hell one heart attack inducing moment for us. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing. But something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around in the snow. Edit. I appreciate the wholesome award, guys. The Ariel Castro kidnappings. Basically, a man living in Cleveland, Ohio, kidnapped 3 young girls and kept them prisoner in his home in Tremont for 12 years. He even had a child with one. Eventually, one escaped and managed to contact police, who arrested Castro and saved the other 2 girls. Edit. changed 2 to 12. Typo. In 1983, an accidental large-scale nuclear war almost started by a Soviet satellite malfunction. Only stopped by Stanislav Petrov disobeying orders. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Stanislav_Petrov. The War Crimes that Unit 731 Japanese have done, including but not limited to dissecting Chinese and Koreans' children alive, or vivisection, raping babies, syphilis and frostbite testing on Chinese, steaming Chinese alive, etc. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/unit_731. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/unit_731. The data that 78% of human body is made of water is partially a result of the 731 drying experiment, where Japanese scientists roasted Chinese civilians to death in a high-temperature room for 15 hours. Then weighed the dried mummy body and compared it with the victim's body weight before the experiment. A story I heard from my grandpa is that they lured orphans with food because Chinese were starving. During the long-lasting WW2. Tricked them saying the injections were vaccines against flu while it's actually full of STI virus. Then observed them slowly dying in agony, but continuously supplying them basic nutrition so they would last for as long as possible. The Nanjing Massacre is just a cornerstone of the terrible war crimes conducted by the Japanese imperial armies, where half of the population from one of the most developed cities in China at the time were just wiped out in 10 days. Bodies were burnt for months. The world history has never witnessed such a cliff drop in population. The Imperial Japan did not consider Chinese Koreans or Indonesians as humans. They're referring to them as monkeys and logs. Even the Auschwitz camp is acknowledged. But Unit 731 and the terrible biological warfares have never been acknowledged by Japanese up till today. Not to mention apologies. Even though there are evidences and memorials everywhere all over Asia, my grandpa always says, history is written by the winners. But these horrible things really happened. People remember. The Fritzl case. A man named Joseph Fritzl who lived in a small town called Amstetten in Austria fakes the disappearance of her daughter Elizabeth. In reality, he keeps her captive for 24 years in a hidden room in the basement of his house he had been working in as a nuclear shelter. During this period of time he assaulted his daughter several times and had several children with her who grew older over time in this room. When one of Elizabeth's children died shortly after being born, he just took the body from her and incinerated it. He also regularly punished them by cutting the electricity or not bringing them food. Joseph wanted to take care of the children with his wife, Elizabeth's mother, who wasn't aware of the events in her basement. So he'd make Elizabeth write fake letters and then he would pretend he found the babies in their porch. In 2008, when one of Elizabeth's oldest daughter Kirsten fell sick, Joseph sent her to a hospital. After a long talk, Joseph let Elizabeth go see her daughter at the hospital. The police catched them in the hospital and interrogated them. Elizabeth told them her long and horrifying story. But no, before she could make them promise she would never have to see her father again. Here's a Wikipedia article about it. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Fritzl_case. 2 other stories would be the Piggy Palace Massacre or the case of Robert Hansen. A guy the first was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife and my daughter said, no. Don't go, Daddy. Of course I can't resist that, so I stayed home and we had a good night. My friend, however, had the worst night of his life. His party was going good and everything was fine. Even though there was a friend of a friend there who no one really knew. Turns out the stranger had been smoking PCP and decided to start killing people. He took a butcher knife and slashed 3 people's throats. My friend's wife threw their kids out of a 2-story window and jumped out herself. Took them into the woods and called the police. All 3 people died. The police found the guy walking down the side of the road covered in blood and incoherent. He had no idea what he just did. So he said, "What really pisses me off is he was such a good guy. He was a big biker-looking teddy bear. Was never an asshole to anyone and always did what was the right thing. We worked together and hit it off from day one. Always ready with a joke and smile. Maybe not going saved my life. Or maybe I could have helped. That weighs on me even 20 years later. The fact that some little boss destroyed the lives of 3 good families that he didn't even know. Really pisses me off, and I hope he rots in prison and gets his ass kicked every day. Rip Blaine. You were a good man." The Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs. A group of 3 teenagers in Ukraine started out committing petty robbery. They moved on to torturing animals. Not long after that they just started murdering strangers. They killed a bunch of people by bashing the shit out of them with household tools for no reason. Knowing there are people like that in the world is terrifying. People who will just murder complete strangers just for their own entertainment. Edit. Added a missing word. Edit number 2. Yes, it's the 3 guys, 1 hammer. I was avoiding that detail because I didn't want to encourage people looking for it, but so many people are asking that question that it seems like I have no choice. A woman I worked with a few years ago told me how her life had changed drastically. She went from having a decent job to becoming an alcoholic and working as a cleaner. She had planned to move to Spain with her husband and young daughter and had a great job lined up out there. The plan was her husband and daughter would fly over first and she would fly over a week or 2 later due to finishing her old job a little later than planned. Her husband rang her on the day he arrived and said the house was lovely and the furniture had arrived by ferry ECT. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Her husband and daughter was found dead by authorities a few days after she rang, explaining she was concerned for their welfare as she had had no contact with them and she was extremely worried. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. It is so scary to think how fast your life can change. This isn't a scary story, but it's spooky and always captured my imagination. One day a bunch of, I think they were police in training, explored some of the catacombs under Paris. A lot of them are completely unmapped. They entered an area and heard dogs barking and snarling. They continued going and saw there were speakers mounted on the wall, playing pre-recorded dog sounds and cameras. They continued. They came into this huge opening and found a cinema. It was lavishly decorated. It had projectors and a mix of old and new movies. It even had electricity running and 3 phone lines. The police marked where they were and went back outside. The next day they returned to try and investigate further with more experienced officers. Everything was gone. All the wiring had been ripped out. All the furniture was gone. All that remained was a note that said, "Do not try to find us." As far as I know, they never figured out who was there. Edited to correct some mistakes. The Silent Gibbon twins. 2 sisters who rarely spoke except to each other. They were sent to separate boarding schools to get them to talk to other people but entered severe catatonia. They were eventually hospitalized and made a pact that if one of them died, the other must speak and live a normal life. They had a months-long discussion and decided which one should commit suicide. Eventually, one died of heart inflammation. No causes noted on the autopsy. And just moments after the planned time the other spoke, "I'm free at last. Liberated. And at last Jennifer has given up her life for me." Chicago Tylenol murders. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Chicago_Tylenol_murders. The Chicago Tylenol murders were a series of poisoning deaths resulting from drug tampering in the Chicago metropolitan area in 1982. The victims had all taken Tylenol-branded acetaminophen capsules that had been laced with potassium cyanide. A total of 7 people died in the original poisonings, with several more deaths in subsequent copycat crimes. No suspect was ever charged or convicted of the poisonings. The incidents led to reforms in the packaging of over-the-counter substances and to federal anti-tampering laws. The actions of Johnson & Johnson to reduce deaths and warn the public of poisoning risks have been widely praised as an exemplary public relations response to such a crisis. A few years ago, a dude dressed as a clown came to a camp one went to. Apparently he broke into the cabin I was staying in and stole stuff from some people in my cabin. He took primarily cash and a phone that kids had on them. I saw him there but I was so young I didn't think much of it. Apparently they couldn't find him because of the gloves he wore and his full-body costume. All of the kids had their stuff replaced, but the craziest part is a few of us heard a scream that could not have come from a grown man that came from the road. That dude was weird and it was terrifying as an 11-year-old. The Jonestown Mass Murder-Suicide. Jonestown. November 18, 1978. Location of the mass murder-suicide of members of the California-based People's Temple cult at the behest of their charismatic but paranoid leader, Jim Jones, in Jonestown Agricultural Commune, Guyana. The death toll exceeded 900, including some 300 who were age 17 and under, making the incident one of the largest mass deaths in American history. https www.britannica.com/event/Jonestown. I like the story of Terrare, the man who ate everything. Whilst in hospital he was accused of eating offal from the bins and a toddler went missing for which he was also blamed. He ate puppies and lizards. He ate a banquet for 6 on his own. He had very stretchy skin that would glow and sweat profusely after eating. He had frequent exudative diarrhea and an odor emanated from him which could still be smelled from a distance. He was shunned by society. A good explanation of his very interesting story, including his very short time as a spy, can be found on Wikipedia. This is a true story from close to my hometown. A 1-year-old girl got killed by 2 dogs. They literally ate the little girl. Even worse, the owners of the dogs were also in the same family as the girl. The survival story of Mary Vincent. Picked up as a hitchhiker. Mary was driven out to the middle of nowhere, raped, and left for dead. But not before her attacker chopped both her arms off above the elbow and tossed her over the side of the road and down a ditch. She crawled back up and onto a pitch-black desert road and followed the sound of the highway to try and get help. Nude, dirty, bloody, and missing both arms, she was picked up and rescued by a couple on their honeymoon. I'd link an article but you need to hear it from the mouth of Karen Kilgariff. https myfavorite-murder.com/247-champions-in-our-own-ways/ Murder of Sylvia Likens. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki, murder_of_Sylvia_Likens. The parents of Sylvia Likens left her with her caregiver. The caregiver used her sister as a coercive threat and along with her children and their friends, tortured and killed her. This true story was also made into a 2007 movie, The Girl Next Door, which was based on the 1989 novel, The Girl Next Door. The story of Abir Qasim al-Janabi. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki, Mahmudia_rape_and_killings. Abir lived with her mother, her father, and her 3 siblings, 6-year-old Hadil, 9-year-old Ahmed and 11-year-old Muhammad. Their house was situated west of Al-Mahmudia, Iraq, approximately 200 meters from a 6-man U.S. traffic checkpoint. From their checkpoint, the soldiers would often watch Abir doing her chores and tending to the garden. On March 12, 2006, in a pre-planned attack, 5 soldiers walked in broad daylight into Abir's house. They separated Abir and her family into 2 different rooms. One soldier, Stephen D. Green, murdered both Abir's parents and her younger sister, while 2 other soldiers took turns to hold the child down and rape her in the other room. Green emerged stating, "I just killed them. All are dead," and proceeded to rape Abir himself. Finally, he shot her in the head, doused her in kerosene, and set the lower part of Abir's body, from her stomach down to her feet, on fire. The Rape of Nanking. You can watch the documentary on Amazon. It's some of the most brutal attacks upon men, women, children, and the elderly that I've heard. It's heartbreaking. Soldiers would stick something up a woman's vagina to see how far it would go in. They would rape elderly women and children. They would sometimes let the prettier ones live. One soldier raped an 8-year-old girl in the street. There wasn't anything they could do but watch. I can't imagine the absolute pain and agony those poor people went through. Explorers like a century or 2 ago went to look about the Arctic but had their supplies accidentally destroyed, and soon they all ran out. They hunted a polar bear and ate the insides of it. No one at the time knew about how deathly a polar bear's liver was, because of the high amounts of vitamin A, which can be bad for skin too. Toxicity made him and his crew deathly ill, and when one of them felt that their foot was wet, he took it out and the lining of his skin came off with the boot. True story. TLDR. Explorers killed a polar bear, ate its liver, CSME under the effects of vitamin A, skin loss and toxicity, and most probably died. A woman my mom is friends with came home to find her entire family brutally murdered. Her parents, grandparents, and both her older siblings, plus her baby sister. She grabbed her younger brother and ran to the neighbor's house. The police arrived. It turns out her oldest brother killed them all, and was waiting on his sister and brother to come home to kill them too. The only thing that saved her life is that she stopped before she went upstairs, which is where he was lying in wait with an axe. To this day, every 3 years she has to bring all of his letters where he is still threatening to kill them to the parole board to prevent his release. Story number 2 ****. My cousin's neighbor came over to visit and was acting off. First, her house was 3 miles away, on a dirt road, and she had walked over in the middle of hot summer. This wasn't normal for her. She was jittery and kept mentioning that she hadn't heard from her husband all day and was afraid to go home. My cousin's mom came in the room and pulled my cousin to the side and told her to keep the neighbor talking. She was calling the police. Cousin's mom had noticed a chunk of what looked like hamburger meat on the woman's dress, and thought that she might be in some kind of shock and that something might be wrong at home. The police arrive and take her outside. She continues to be jittery and not making a lot of sense. They check her house. They find her husband's recliner soaked in blood. with a trail leading up the stairs. On the stairs they find fingers. At the top of the stairs. In the bedroom. They find her husband dead. She had killed him with a butcher knife because he was taking up too much of her time. As she left, he wasn't dead yet, and had started up the stairs to get to the phone. She attacked him again and cut off several fingers. He went still and she believed he was dead and took off. He almost made it to the phone. What radiation poisoning does to you if you're not lucky enough to die quickly? The worst case that I can think of outside of the Chernobyl incident was the case of Hisashi Aochi, a Japanese plant worker who was exposed to fatal amounts of radiation, but thanks to his family and the doctors he was kept alive against his will for 83 goddamn days. A week into the hospital he said, "I can't take it anymore. I am not a guinea pig." Yet the doctors continued on. When he died, all of his skin had fallen off. All of the skin grafts had fallen off. He'd lost multiple limbs. And he was suffering heart attacks multiple times a day. There are pictures of him on his hospital bed that if you've been around the internet long enough, you'll know as part of the original, Shocking Images, collection. It looks like it came straight out of a torture porn movie. I sometimes work on the grounds of a nuclear power plant and always said that if the worst happened, and I was exposed to a lethal amount of radiation, that I would just kill myself rather than suffer. Something like that. Well, this is scary in a weird personal way. But here goes. My grandfather was hit in the lung pretty bad by a sniper in WW2. The bullet would have hit him right in his heart. But at the last second he hunched a little bit to light a cigarette. So, if my grandfather wasn't a smoker, I probably wouldn't exist right now. My brother was a police officer. He had a call to check on the welfare of a mother who had not showed up for work. She had died on the sofa and her little toddler had brought the little diaper pad and laid down next to her, and died of dehydration. The little kid had opened the lower cabinets and drawers in the kitchen looking for food. He still cries about it. And he's not the crying kind. The abduction of J.C. Lee Dugard. Kidnapped when she was 11 at her bus stop while her stepfather watched in horror by a paroled sex offender and his wife. She was held captive for 18 years until found in 2009. He was supposed to be spending 50 years in prison for the kidnap and rape of a woman, but only served 10 when he abducted JC in 1991. JC bore his children, 2 daughters, while in captivity, and they knew her as their older sister the entire time. The good news is, JC and her daughters were reunited with her mother and are doing well. H. Holmes and the Murder Castle. He was formally accused of 27 murders but found guilty of only 1. These are his murder stats. 10 to 34 killed, 200 plus estimated, possible. This is the related Wikipedia article. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/h._h._Holmes. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/great_molasses_flood. 2.3 million gallons of molasses exploded out of a poorly made container in Boston and flooded a neighborhood, killing 21 people and injuring 150. The scary part is hearing about how people tried to swim out of it, but it was too thick. They got tired and would sink under the molasses slowly and suffocate as they tried to breathe. The thought of this death haunts me. I'm not claustrophobic, but I could imagine it being a total nightmare for someone who is.